and he's played a pivotal role in Bharti's phenomenal growth right since its inception, both organically and by way of various acquisitions. For Bharti, he had led a lot of partnerships with leading international operators, raised several billion dollars over years for project finance from global banks, bond markets, and credit agencies, conceptualized and implemented the transformational initiatives that include the outsourcing deals by the group in IT sector. Responsible for forming the Indus Towers, the joint venture of Vodafone and Idea, one of the largest tower companies of the world. And he's been instrumental in acquisition of Zain Group's mobile operations in 15 countries across Africa. And he's been a recipient of various global awards, which are so distinguished. Thank you, sir, for accepting our invitation, and over to you.
My pleasure. Thank you very much, Divya. Thanks for your very kind words. Well, you know, I've written this book titled Some Sizes Fit All. And like most of the amateur writers like me, for whom book writing is not a profession, it generally is that tick in the box kind of a feeling where you have this bucket list where you do want to write a book, share your experiences and whatever you have learned during your corporate life in particular. So to me, initially, it was the reason why I decided to write a book. But as I penned down my thoughts, I thought that perhaps the best audience for this kind of a book and for sharing my thoughts will be students like you, the management students who are going to be the budding leaders of tomorrow. So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity, because this is precisely the audience I would like to interact with. More, not to tell you what is right or wrong, because you definitely must form your own opinions about right and wrong. But more important for me to get your feedback, your questions, your queries, and also your comments on each of the matters which I have listed there. So let me start by first telling you why I chose this particular topic. Now, those who have read the preface, I have mentioned there that one of the biggest things in corporate worlds, every time something goes wrong, is a lot of people coming up and saying, oh, you know, we did everything wrong because one size doesn't fit all. That whatever we have been succeeding with, whatever we have been hugely successful with, you know, it doesn't work in every situation. And you would, I'm sure, as students, would have heard this very often. I've heard it so often in my life that I used to wonder as to how is it possible that after years of experience, tremendous success, somebody is to tell you that whatever you have been thinking is completely wrong. And as I introspected, I realized that it's a very shallow statement. Most of the time, it is an escapist statement, because people are just trying to find some reasons to pin as to what went wrong. The fact remains, and that's what I've tried to bring out in the books as the first and the foremost theme, is that the basic principles of management, whether it's general management, whether it's specific disciplines, they all remain the same. Now, what changes with each situation will be the tactics and the actual execution of those basic themes. Let me give you an example. You know, we went into Africa. We acquired operations in 15 countries. And everybody told us that, you know, for each country, you have got to look at completely differently. And I used to wonder what nonsense. I mean, I'm in telecom. The way I do telecom in India has to be virtually the same as how I do everywhere. But yes, what changes is, so let's see what would be the basics. The basics would be telecom needs a great network. You're all telecom consumers. I hope most of you are Airtel customers. The biggest thing in telecom is the quality of network. If the network is fine, most of the other things are fine. The second is your products, your offering should be simple. Third, your billing should be accurate. You should not be overcharging. And the fourth then is communication with the customers. Now, the first three remain the same. It's the communication which will depend on language, the custom, what are the festivals in that country, what is the kind of communication which people like and so on. But that doesn't change anything in terms of the basic. So that was the theme I felt for all aspiring leaders. I firmly believe do not get confused by the fact that because tactics will need to change, the basics and fundamentals of business or management would change. The second big theme, which I was always irritated with in the corporate world, is the fact that corporate world makes things very complex. Now, most of the time you would hear people telling you that, corporate world is very complex because there is an ever changing and dynamic situation, which is a fact. As we all grow old, as we put more years, things will change. This is what is the nature of this world. That's an evolution. But we can't say that things become complex because things are changing. So technologies change. They're supposed to be making life simpler, not making more complex. And I realized that the reason why there is so much complexity in corporate world is that the so-called experts in every discipline, they like to keep it that way. Because the fundamental principle behind their expertise is that if we can convey it in a simple manner so that everybody can understand what happens to my perception of being an expert. And that is the biggest flaw I find in corporate world. And as future leaders, I really would like to implore upon you to say that simplicity and simplification is a virtue. And therefore, uh, what is extremely important is to build up a culture where, like for instance, let me give an example. At Bharti, during our induction programs, I'm generally called upon to address the senior people who are joining. And my first and foremost message to them is that at Bharti, to us, an expert is one who can make the most complex aeronautical science so simple that the lowest level person in the room talking to you is able to understand what's going on. He is an expert, not the one who makes things complex. So, one other theme which you will find in the book throughout is a big attempt to simplify things, put it in a manner that everybody understands. Because one basic principle is if people don't understand you, they can be in awe. They could feel that you know something which they can't understand. That's what I call the emperor's clothes syndrome. But if you really want to achieve something, you need teamwork. And for teamwork, every member of the team has to understand what you are doing, what is being demanded of them, what is expected of them. Unless they align, you can't have a teamwork. And the third big theme, which I have encountered in my professional career, is something which is very basic to human nature. We human beings are basically followers. And that is the reason why, whether it is countries, whether it is companies, you find very few leaders. And I really feel that people like you should be aspiring to be leaders and not followers. Now, when I say leaders, it does not mean that we do not learn from what others have already achieved, but a mindset which prevents you from doing things differently, which you call innovation, merely because nobody else has done it, is the worst thing which can happen to a leader and thereby to the companies or the country that you work for. So I felt that these were three very important things which I really wanted to address in my book. And I'm so pleased that I'm interacting today with you. So I would love to, have your comments. Some of the things which I have mentioned in the book are absolutely from real life. For instance, on innovation, I think we have had many fuss. And let me take you back to 2000. Some of you must have been too young at that time. But that was the time when telecom in India was just about to take off, really. It started in 1995. The first 4 or 5 years were very, very tumultuous, very difficult years. And then we suddenly saw an opportunity as more auctions were coming up of becoming an all India player. Now we were still a very tiny company. We had no resources. People were not willing to join us because we were a small company. IT experts, network experts, they refused to join because they were very keen to join an IBM or an Infosys or a Wipro or Ericsson or Nokia. They were not willing to join a small company called Bharti Airtel. And that is where there was a big clash between our ambition, which was to go all India, and our resources. And that's when we innovated and said, okay, in that even let us outsource some of these functions to these partners because we don't have resources, they have the expertise. And that is how IT outsourcing, network management outsourcing, all these concepts came up. And it made us rise and grow at such a fast pace, which would have been impossible if we had followed the traditional way that unless you have built that whole IT organization yourself, you should not attempt to grow. Similarly, we did not have much capital. So we went to the vendors and we said, instead of buying piecemeal, we are going to buy on the basis of capacity which you produce for us. That became very famous as dollar per Erlang. So we said we will buy Erlang, which is the measurement of capacity in telecom. And that again was the very first one in the world. It gave us the luxury that as we grew, as the revenues started coming in, we were able to make payments for the networks. Then again in 2007, when things had settled down, we realized that there was so much money being wasted in the industry because every company was setting up its own infrastructure. You would have seen telecom towers. Many a time in the same place, you would see 3, 4 towers. And that is what was happening. Every operator felt this is their USP. They will not share it with somebody. And that's when we stepped up and we said, look, the concept can be that while you compete on the front end, you can very easily collaborate on the back end. And that's when we formed Industar, where I invited Vodafone and Idea, who were, as you can imagine, are fierce competitors of Airtel. And I was able to convince them that there is no reason why we should not pool our resources, put them into a joint venture where nobody controls, and it can be shared on a non-discriminated basis with everybody. And that became the norm in the world. Today, passive infrastructure industry is a huge industry, a very successful industry. And then once again, I mentioned about some sizes fit all. Africa was a great example for us. Those 15 countries, everybody kept telling us, keep a completely different organization for each country, have fully equipped for every discipline. But we realized that was absolutely unnecessary and with great results. After some initial hiccups, I think once we understood the customs and the way to communicate there, we have been doing extremely well. So with that, let me request you to put up your views or your comments or queries on any of the matters in the book.
Good morning, Akshay Dinde.
Good morning.
Sir, you also mentioned this thing about simplicity in 2015 while talking about treasury. And that is very much important. Like me being from the aviation industry, there are so many experts who talk about same technical things and make people confused and try to be an expert. So I totally agree to that point, and it was very much necessary for you to like. It is a very good thing that people like you are trying to bring this out to the world, so that people can follow and become more simple. It is a very good thing that you're doing. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Sir, good morning. Praneeth this side. So, sir, I had a question that since you expanded to Africa and you also talked about it, so there must be local culture traditions that you would have had to adapt to fit into that community, right? So when you say that people talk to you to make these distributed networks. So what prompted you to still have a uniform, a single unit of, so as to say, leadership, and not to go for distributed leadership? Was it to, was it from a cost factor or from a higher purpose?
No, let me clarify. First of all, fortunately, since we acquired running operations, we faced less of this problem. Second, when I say central leadership, I don't mean that each country did not have a MD. Every country had an MD and its own disciplines. But some of the basic thoughts, some of the basic decisions, for instance, network procurement, the IT system which we take, IT softwares which we take, those were decided centrally so that there was standardization across all countries and we could avail of the economies of scale. So of course you have to distribute and you have to empower people, but that is very different from taking some central decisions on some key matters. For instance, HR policies, treasury policies, accounting policies, they were all central, but execution was distributed. The broad distribution policy, tariff policy, they were central. But of course, tariff differed from country to country, depending on the income level, depending on the competition. But the basic principle of tariff fixing was, if you are a leader, you will keep a small premium. If you are a follower, you will keep a small discount. And based on that principle, every country was allowed to set their own tariffs.
Right, sir. So a follow-up question on tariffs as well. So we all know that India has the lowest telecom tariffs in the whole world, right? And it is partly due to the price war that has been taking place. So, and I even got to know that the levels of prices that the Indian consumers pay is even lower than the sustainability costs that the telecom operators have to incur. So from that perspective, what I feel is that the prices, as per experts, what they said was they need to rise in India and they will rise in India. Otherwise, the industry could collapse. So what are your views on that?
I think that's an absolutely correct assumption. The price wars which have started in 2016 with the entry of Jio at one level has been very good for the consumer. On the other, I think it's a clear case to my mind of predatory pricing, which the government should prevent. We are seeing that kind of phenomena not only in telecom, but in e-commerce, where the global giants are using predatory pricing to kill some Indian companies. I think on a principle basis, good, decent pricing in any industry is very important for a foreign country, because without that, the industry remains in a few hands, those who have the muscle power. For growth of enterprise, growth of people coming up and setting up ventures, I think it's important that people get a good chance to grow. But yeah, I think it's also a function of volumes. India is a very big country, and therefore the tariffs here will naturally be a little lower, but they're far too low. They definitely need to rise.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks, sir. This is Sumit. So my question is that, as you mentioned, the journey started in mid 1990s. And at that point of time, even Government of India was having the vision that for maybe around 10 years, we'll have 50,000 subscribers, because MTNL itself had, from past decades, managed to have 100,000 subscribers. So how did Airtel sort of reach this vision, even of the Government of India, that from just 100,000, 200,000, we'll take it to like 20 million subscribers? So what was the key ingredient you feel that you managed to have such a large scale vision? And that is how basically in BPL and, Hutchinson and then Vodafone as well came into the picture, because the competition increased.
So to be very honest, we had no bloody vision like that. Absolutely no vision and no illusion that we will reach 300 million customers at one point of time. And let me tell you how this whole vision bit evolved. When we started, there was a report which was done by an expert company, which of course kept into account the tariffs at that time and the handset price at that time. And that report, I still vividly remember, had said that in 5 years, a city like Delhi could have 48,423 subscribers. I still remember that figure vividly. In 5 years, 48,423 subscribers. That was their best estimate. And perhaps they were right, because a hand device or a handset, those they used to cost about a lakh of rupees or 80,000 rupees. And the tariffs, as you know, the government was proposing was 16 rupees a minute. But what happened was that as we realized over, as we set up projects and we got into developer Erlang, and we realized that this is one industry where the cost or the capex is based on the capacity you actually utilize. So a small customer utilizes very little capacity. And also this is a cloud. So when he utilizes and he stops talking, the clouds come back to the original shape. Therefore, you could accommodate a lot more people. You could actually allocate cost in a manner that a small customer is also feasible, which was not the case earlier. So the fact was we have no vision. My only vision, which we first showed to the world, was that India could have a number of customers on mobile, which could be equal to the car owners and the scooter owners. And I still remember in, I think, 1996, I made a presentation at, I think it was HSBC, or no, sorry, Morgan Stanley conference in Hong Kong. And I presented this theory that India could have these many number of customers over the next few years. And they were still in millions. And people were just shocked, because they said, what nonsense, I mean, what is the connection between cars and scooters? And my logic was, a car costs so much in capex and so much in opex. And a scooter costs so much in capex and so much in opex. People who can afford that, with what we were wanting to offer to them, they will be able to afford this as well. But then, obviously, as the prices came down, the handset prices came down, volumes grew, every calculation just went up in smoke. And you know how this industry has grown. But the key about vision, since you talked of vision, what I have come to a conclusion is there is nothing like a vision, which is a permanent vision. The vision or the dreams are the ones which you keep renewing with every passing phase. And companies who fail, or individuals who fail to renew their dreams or their vision, will fall by the roadside. We know so many companies, you must be reading in your courses, that in 80s and 90s, the companies which were at top are not counted anywhere. Perhaps they could not renew their dreams, perhaps they could not keep up with the evolution and could not keep on revising their own vision. So I do feel that it's very important that within the company, a DNA and a culture has to be created where people can pump others to dream big at every point of time, renew their vision and renew their dreams, and bring in innovative thoughts, so that there is no a setting in of lethargy and arrogance in the company. We should always be able to look ahead and say what more we can do. And for that, in one of the chapters, I have mentioned about a concept called a power of D. This was a theory which was propounded by one of our lecturers in Harvard. I did an AMP course there. And this professor, Professor Fuhan, he came up with this concept of D. And his message was very simple, which really appealed to me. So you must create a culture in organizations where at every point of time, irrespective of how successful you have been, there has to be a power of D, which is dissatisfaction. You must create dissatisfaction, even if you are immensely successful, to say that we could do much better. We need to do more. That is the dissatisfaction you need to create. And that will give rise to a vision.
Thank you.
So, when you say fixing it when it is not broken, how motivated can an organization be when it's at the top and they have to disrupt their ways and reinvent themselves time and again? So, where does the motivation come from, even when you are at the top?
Well, I think you have picked up a really, really good topic, because this is one of the most favorite topics. And this motivation has got to come from the top. This has to be uh, driven into the DNA of an organization, where constantly, like a radar, you must be scanning the horizon to see what are the things which, even if I am doing generally very well, there must be something which I can improve, which I can fix. And the best way to do that is in times when you are doing well, you can afford some disruptions, if at all, or you can afford to invest in new technology or new ways of working. So this can never come from the bottom. It has to always come from the top. And that is where it's a matter of DNA. You have to have a scanning device in the company which keeps scanning and saying what portions can we do better than what we have been doing right now.
Thank you, sir.
Hello, sir. Hello.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Sir, one question I always think about these big companies: how do you generate these new ideas and like great ideas in your organization?
I think, as I mentioned, this is a matter of really DNA, where you have to, there can be no one repository of great ideas. We are all, let's face it, you are all studying about artificial intelligence and so on. The fact remains, human mind is so weak, this is at least my theory, that the smallest of computer today will beat a human mind. Therefore, there can be no one single repository of innovation and fresh thinking. It is something you have to just create within the organization, where you encourage everybody to think afresh, think new, innovate, but bring in the discipline that when they think of some innovation, they research it very well, so that it doesn't become something frivolous. He should be able to defend, he or she, whatever new way of working or new innovative thought he is bringing up. So that piece, I think, if you create that culture, people do get encouraged to put forth, and you have to take that fear of ridicule out of it. Most of the people will not put up a new thought, because if there is a well established thought, generally the tendency to ridicule a person with new thought. And that's something, if you can build that culture in the organization, that it would be welcome, provided the guy has done some research, he has thought of pros and cons, tried to address pros and cons, and then he throw open this topic for discussion among a select group. If you do that, I think there is no dearth of innovative ideas.
Thank you, sir.
Good morning, sir. This is Ali.
Hi.
Sir, you said in your session that keep things simple. But at times we see that when we are framing things, we frame it from our point of reference. And we think that what we are understanding, everybody is understanding. So how can we change our thought process in that sense and work in that direction so that everything becomes simple for everyone?
Yeah, I think that's a very, very good point. And I think everybody has to really come up. And as I mentioned, many of these things are very culture oriented. You have to encourage people that if you are not understanding something, please stand up and tell your superiors that, sir, I'm not getting it. I've not understood what you're saying. Now, how we started it in our company, I'm a chartered accountant. I don't have much knowledge of technical or anything. I don't even claim I have too much knowledge of finance, because finance has been changing so much. So a lot of people used to come to me for presentation and, getting decisions on what investment we can make. And I always used to tell them that, look, guys, if I have not understood what you're trying to say, I'm sure there may be many others in the room who have not understood, but are afraid to speak. And therefore, you have to encourage everybody to come up and say, I have not understood what you're trying to say. So you're absolutely right. People need to stand up and say, I have not understood what you're saying. Can you please explain it in simple terms, what you're trying to convey to me? So if you do that, then it's not only my point of view, you actually make an inclusive statement where everybody is understanding what's being said.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Sir, I just have one question. It's a bit off topic. When this price war started in 2016, what was the first response? And because it was like for the existing players, it was like a big blow. How did you cope up, and how, as a leader, how things should work or proceed?
Okay, fortunately, when you are in telecom in India, you are used to this nonsense about price wars all throughout, not only in 2016, but 2001, 2002, when for the first time Reliance entered, there was a huge price war. They failed at that time, but even then the price wars continue. Whether it was between us, Vodafone, Idea, price wars have never gone away. And that's a very unfortunate and a natural trend in telecom industry worldwide. So when in 2016 this onslaught came in a very big way, and you're right, that was actually life-threatening. It was an existential kind of a stuff where your whole existence was in doubt. Our first thought at the top leadership of Bharti and Bharti Airtel was that the only thing you can do in these circumstances are believe in two things. One, keep your balance sheet very strong. Because when this adversity hits, people who are strong are bound to get stronger. And the reason is very simple. If you as a company are able to withstand this blow, many smaller companies or weaker companies will just get wiped out. And that is going to vacate space for you. So you are bound to come stronger, but you have to keep yourself very strong. And the best way to keep yourself strong is to keep a very strong balance sheet. Therefore, your financial management becomes a very key thing. And that's what I would advocate when you get into companies as leaders. One thing you always remember and must implement, keep your company's balance sheet very strong. Don't over leverage, keep it strong, because there will be rough days, there will be bad times round the corner at any point of time. But if you can withstand those bad times, you're bound to emerge much stronger if you keep the balance sheet strong. So that was practically the only principle we followed.
Thanks a lot, sir. Probably I'll leverage the financial course more now, given the fact that.
No, so I think that's a very valid point, because a lot of times we hear from leaders the positive aspects, what you should do and what you must do. But in fact, half of the business is run through crisis management only. And if you are able to do that well, then only your business will be able to survive and thrive. So this point that you raised is, I think, very valid, because it really helps, really tells how you sail through.
Yeah, I think the other principle in corporate world, and in fact in this world is, and all of you need to remember this very, very sincerely, people will give you money when you really don't need it. Nobody in the world will give you money when you desperately need it. And that is one of the examples of fixing it when it ain't broke. When you are in good times, raise money, because everybody will rush to give you money at that time. But if you are in deep trouble, take Vodafone Idea today, for instance. Because the money was not raised in good time, you always find problem. So that's a fundamental principle. Fix things while the going is good. You will easily be able to fix it. Whether it's your balance sheet, whether it's your processes, whether it's the technology, whether it's the network technology, do it at that time. And the same goes for finances.
Hello, sir. So my question is that in an industry where we have high fixed costs, like for example, telecom, the degree of operating leverage increases considerably. So in these scenarios, what strategies do companies use to reduce the risks? Because, these are very risky investments that sometimes can actually sway the returns towards both sides. So what are some of the strategies that companies use to reduce the risk considerably, considering a high operating leverage?
I think that's a really, really a good question. And I've often talked about it. I'm a big advocate for this one. The best way to overcome this phenomena is to try and make telecom an asset light industry. The huge problem in telecom is it's a very asset heavy industry. And the way to make it asset light is what we have done with the towers. You shift the towers to an outside company, make them build the towers and then share it. So what it does, it reduces your capex cost. It reduces your OPEX cost because with sharing, the OPEX comes down, the energy cost comes down. And I think that principle has got to be applied across. Over a period of time, I would love to see netcos come up, where not only the passive infrastructure like towers and diesel generators and so on are shared, even the active elements of the network are shared. And perhaps the ideal situation to overcome all this will be that you have operators and you have network providers. So let the operators just operate and market, and network providers provide capacity. Now both sides will be good because here it's an OPEX, it's a variable cost, and there, because you are sweating the asset very well by sharing it and giving it to many people, the capacity utilization is massive. So both sides gain. So I think to your question, which is absolutely the right question, and this applies not only to telecom. As I said, these principles will apply all across. There should be asset light models and there could be asset heavy models. But that asset heavy model has to be such where the capacity utilization or the capital utilization has to be tremendous, which you'd achieve by sharing that asset with many people. So there are two different things and both sides can tremendously gain in the process.
Thank you.
Good morning, sir.
Morning.
I have a question from the writer's perspective. Actually, I'm also a writer. I've written a book, but of Hindi poems. So we writers uh, generally generally make layers and keep our thoughts into that layers and form our structure to write a book or a novel or something, anything like that. So it is very difficult to keep our thoughts in those layers throughout the whole lifetime of that book, means whenever we are writing. So as your book is out of the box thing, means you have written something which is not in the uh, what we say common thing. So how you kept your thoughts in those layers in the whole time when you have written this book?
Well, as a writer, I think this is a really, really a brilliant question. So when I used to read book, this is my first book, maybe the last, I don't know whether I'll have the energy to write another one. So I really enjoyed it. But I used to always wonder as to how have people been able to construct a book and you know what follows.
Yes.
So when I thought of the book, I first decided what will be the best way to ensure the right flow. As to what you are wanting to write, the flow has to be right. So what I realized, at least it worked for me very well, and I'm sure for many aspiring writers, it could be a good uh, thought process of how to build about a book. I started by writing the preface. The first thing I wrote was the preface because you need to be as a writer very, very clear as to what are you going to be writing on.
Yes,
What do you
that is
want
the
to write on?
what you want to convey.
What do you want to convey? Therefore, if you are very clear on your preface, your book is likely to come out well. And when you write a preface, it needs many iterations because as you write,
Yes.
you keep thinking that, oh, I missed out this, or this is not what I'm wanting to really base this book on. That's the first thing. The second is once you write the preface, write the index. That is the second step I followed. Write the index. And that's when I was writing it, I realized that the best will be to put it in three parts. The first part deals with the general management principles. The second part deals with specific disciplines. And the third part deals with what we experience as day-to-day ways of working. And so once you are able to put this index in place, and of course, as you write, the index does go a little bit of change. For instance, once I had submitted the full manuscript and I sent it for review to a very, very respected analyst called Mr. Chapman Taylor of Capital International, is a dear friend of mine. So he wrote back and he said, Akhil, it's very good, but I wish you had a chapter on what to do, how to deal with failure. And so after submitting the manuscript, I added that chapter. You'll find it in, I think it's in part 3. How do you deal with failure? So some iteration would take place, but once you have got an index in place, I think thereafter it's easy to write because you have already constructed as to what you're wanting to write. At least it worked very well for me.
You have this bottom-up approach.
Yeah, I thought first of all, you should know what do you want to convey. And then you can put words into what your big thoughts were, what you had set out to convey.
So after every chapter, before writing every chapter, you had this thought that you had the preface in your mind, and with that preface, you...
No, so first the preface, second is the index.
Yes.
So once you have put the index, then you come to each chapter and you write what you want to write. That became very simple then.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
But would love to know from you as a writer, how do you write poems, man? That's a more difficult task.
Sir, sir, that is the thing which I perceive is that I keep layers of everything, and I put those thoughts in those layers. Means when I form the structure, that the structure is not very much clear to me at the start. What I want to convey is a thought, just a thought with me that I want to convey this. Then I make modules of those things.
Right.
Then after moduling, I keep my thoughts into those modules and form a structure. That is my way of.
I would say fairly similar, like what I was trying to do for this book.
Yes.
More or less similar.
Yes, more or less. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Sir, can you share one anecdote from your failure, like how to deal with failure, or any story that you would like to share?
Look, obviously, I've been in telecom itself for 25 years. So you can imagine we have had so many failures, so many disappointments. But I think how to deal with failure is, first of all, whatever you are setting out to do, make it a collective responsibility. And that is where alignment is important. And that brings me back to my original thought. Whatever you are wanting to do should be conveyed in such simple terms to the team that everybody owns it. Now, there could be discussion, there could be different views, somebody could oppose, but at the end of the day, whatever you decide to do, the team should own it. That's the first part, right? Because it has to be a collective decision making. The second part is, once you do a collective decision making, there is less chance of finger pointing because we all decided to do it. If you have failed, there will be less finger pointing. Otherwise, typical will be, I told you so, still you went ahead. That has to be avoided. And the third thing is where leadership counts. A leader's principle, I believe, should be very simple. The credit for all success goes to the team members, and the debit or the blame for all failures goes to the team leader. If you can follow that principle, I think you emerge as a better leader. Your teams will respect you. Not that they are going to blame you entirely. They would then be able to share the blame with you more easily. But to the outside world, a leader has to have the guts to say, well, it failed, I take responsibility. And that's where you see all great leaders, whether he's a cricket captain or a football captain, every time you lose a match, generally a good leader like a Dhoni will always come up and say, we could have played better. but as a leader, I take the blame. The leaders are meant to take blames. The glory automatically comes to them.
Thank you, sir. Some similar thought that is taught in our B school is also like whenever you have to take a decision or even in difficult part, you think about the company first, the team second, and yourself third. So it is also something like that. What you are saying, like debit the team leader.
देखिए, yourself वाली तो बात should merge with the company and the team, because people who have to think of themselves alone should find no place in the team. So that is a cultural thing you have to build in the companies. It is the company and the team, and they all intermingle. And that's why, like in Airtel, we have this big slogan which is I am Airtel. Everybody is Airtel. There's nothing like an abstract entity called Airtel. So I am Airtel. Every employee of Airtel is Airtel. That's what you have to build in, that whatever is good for the team, unless it is good for the company, it can never be good for the team, and vice versa. How can it good for the company and bad for the teams? If you're actually getting that feeling that this can be wonderful for the company, but terrible for the teams or the people working in the company, or vice versa, then there is something wrong in the whole thought process that you have followed. Now, there still could be examples. For instance, take automation. On a temporary measure, if a company decides to automate, it is quite possible that it may have to shed some jobs, right? Because naturally you don't need so many people to be doing the same job. But why it is still good for the team is because otherwise there will be an abrupt ouster and pink slips for people. This way what you can do is you can control it, and you can decide that since we are going to be automating, I will stop recruiting more people in this discipline or for this function. Or if there is a natural churn or people are leaving, I will not fill up those places. And gradually I'll try and see that the people who are not needed, can I shift them to other departments, other opportunities which come up because of new efficiencies created. So in some sense, temporarily it could appear that what's good for the company is not good for the people. But I think if you plan well and you have the right intention, you can overcome that, dichotomy and difference between the two.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
So,
And
when you
Sir,
are talking,
that's-
Yeah, sorry, please. Go ahead.
Yeah, Pratik, go ahead.
yes. So when you were talking about HR and succession planning, so what is your view on grooming your internal people for senior management versus, like, there are some companies, if the company is not performing better, change the CEO, hire someone from Ivy League credentials, and he will somehow make the company better. And there is another view that there are some people who are working in an organization since these many years. They are, suppose it's Airtel, they have already gel with the philosophy that I am Airtel, and versus hiring someone external who will take the time to adapt to the philosophy and the overall atmosphere of the management.
I think that's really an excellent question and one dilemma which most companies face. And the general tendency I've seen is every time there is a vacancy, you rush out and try and get an expert in that field. I'm a very, very strong proponent, and I admire Hindustan Lever and Unilever for that. They have this culture that at least 80% of the vacancies are always to be filled internally. And we are very strong in our belief on that. And that is why succession planning and career planning become very important. Because unless you have succession planning, you cannot have career planning for people. And I am certainly of the view that people from within, when they come and occupy the higher position, the company does better, because these are the people who have seen the shortcomings. These are the people who know the culture of the organization, who gel into that role very well. They're prepared for that role. But yes, from time to time, I'm not saying that you should not induct external blood. You should, so that they can come with fresh thoughts. And my personal thought process always is, every time you need to get somebody from outside, try and get somebody who is not from the same industry. Because you get somebody from the same industry, you'll have two things. Either he'll follow the beaten path, or he'll have a completely different way of working which could not gel with the company. Get somebody from another industry. Let him come and learn this industry, come up with thoughts, get a helicopter view, and then quietly tell you that maybe some of these things are not making sense. They need to be looked at differently. But yeah, a big advocate for giving internally people a chance to grow. If you do not, then you will get people who have a transactional relationship with the company and will never be able to become a part of the DNA of the company.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
So speaking of failure, you gave a great example, and that's what Dr. Kalam, when the ISRO mission failed, he took the responsibility on himself as a collective, and when it finally succeeded, he didn't went on to the press conference. I just want to say that if talking about the stock price or a public listed company, when the shares are not doing that great, and we can see that there is fluctuation of price. I have invested in Infratel, that's why I'm asking. How do you manage the public sentiments? I mean, how can you ensure that the company will outperform in the near future and you stay abreast?
I don't. Absolutely, I stay away from the stock price. As the leader or the chairman or the CEO of the company, I always tell them, look, I have nothing to do with the stock price. Question me on my performance. Question me on the ethics, on the governance. Am I doing the reporting right? Am I getting quarterly audits done? Is everything crystal clear? Are you finding faults with my strategy or my execution or my results? What happens to stock price is none of my concern. Frankly, the CEOs who are overburdened with the stock price performance will end up taking wrong decisions. And sometimes I actually wonder whether, in that sense, ESOPs is a good motivator for people. On one hand, obviously, it's a great wealth creator. People grow with the company when going is good. Like the shareholders make money, employees also make money. But in many ways, it gets them aligned to the share price and could actually force them to take shortcuts, wrong practices, wrong decisions, because a company may need to take decisions which are in long-term interest of the company and not short-term. So it's a dicey matter whether we should give ESOPs or reward people in some other manner on different metrics than the stock price. But very clearly, you cannot overburden the top management, the stock price performance. It's my belief, if you are doing well, if your governance standards are top class, sooner or later price will come back. Now, Infratel you talked of, unfortunate because this is one of the, I'm proud to say, I'm the chairman, so I don't have a day-to-day operating role. Therefore, again, the credit goes to the CEO and the team. But it's the squeaky clean company. It is in today's world when most companies lose money. It makes a return on capital employed of pre-tax of 30%, return on equity of 25%. That squeaky clean, steady performance in an environment where because of Vodafone Idea merger, 1/3 of its tenancies went because they vacated those towers. Despite that, it has been just going on strong because the business model is very strong. Governance is very strong. So I would say as a company, we are doing very well. We give full dividend. But yeah, stock price takes into account many factors. It's always worried about whether Voda Idea will survive, whether you'll have only 2 customers. Now, naturally, those uncertainties and whether globally there will be a recession, those I don't control. And I really won't care.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir, because I got it. You concluded that you stick to your fundamentals no matter what happens in the market. Thank you, sir.
Hello, sir. So I feel that as a leader, we have sort of 2 responsibilities which we normally go through. One is motivation, and secondly is giving feedback to our workforce. So in these challenging times, as Ali pointed as well, what happens is, the motivation of the workforce gets depleted. So how as leaders we can bring motivation levels so that the organization is at one page. And secondly, uh, there can be a lot of communication gap as well. So what's the best way to give feedback to the workforce as leaders so that there is no interpersonal conflict, so that, we can overcome those feedback barriers? So what's the best strategy to bring motivation and to give a sound feedback to the company?
So I believe for motivating people, perhaps the only tool is communication. And if you would have seen from the times of Hitler to Churchill, it was always just communication. Hitler was able to communicate that we are very strong, we'll wipe out the world, we will create an absolutely pure entity of Nazis, which will rule the world, and there will be no Jews and no this rubbish and that rubbish. He was communicating his thoughts in a manner which appealed to people. He was able to convey strength. Churchill was able to do the same, but he was able to communicate the weakness. He said, I'm aware that we are weak at this point. I'm aware that Germany is strong and will attack us. But as a leader, he was able to motivate people and say, till we have the last leg, we will keep standing. I'm standing with you. It's about communication. Now, people like me, we are not great orators. So I would not go around, just motivating people with the sheer, the fighter instinct. I would rather do it with facts and figures. And I'll tell them, this is where we are. This is how our balance sheet is. We are very strong. We are not going anywhere. Please don't worry. We are not, our existence is not in doubt. Hang on, do what you are doing best. If there are price wars, let's face it. Let's tackle it head on. But don't worry. If there are some losses, please don't worry. These are the facts of the case. This is what we report every quarter. So you can check for yourself. Our company is very strong. We are not going anywhere. On the other hand, your competition, many of the companies in the competition can go down the tube. And that is where your opportunities will come. You stick to your job. I think communicating with whatever your tool of communication, one fundamental tool is honesty with people. Be honest to them. Like I always get inspired by Churchill. He was honest and he admitted that we are not as strong as we were earlier. Once you are honest and fair and can convey facts, I think people do get motivated. At least I've never seen people not being motivated when you convey to them in a manner that what you're conveying is, we trust you. I'm trusting you. And therefore I'm able to share these facts with you. At least so far that's worked very well with me.
Sir, I have a question. Sir, leaders at a very top level, while communicating the strategies taken, new strategies, while communicating it down to the hierarchy, what kind of challenges they face, and is there anything that they would love to do but they are not able to do in doing so?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge is that when you're communicating it down, is it getting communicated down? And that is what I come back to, that art of simplification. You do not have to talk them about 4G and 5G. You have to tell them what the new technology which is coming is going to do for the customer. How is it going to reduce the cost per unit for us? And how are we going to benefit? What do you need to go and spread this message around? So if you involve them into things which they do not understand, then you would always have a problem. So the communication has to be in a manner that they can understand. If you do that, I think it's easy to implement things then.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Sir, one more thing. I have a question regarding the brand. So I am a customer of Airtel from last 11 years, or from the time my parents allowed me to use mobile phones. And so I can say that I'm brand loyal to Airtel. Even Jio came into the market, I didn't switch to Jio. So when Airtel makes their marketing strategy, so the basic strategy, what I perceive of Airtel is the brand loyal customers who don't switch to Airtel because of their services. So you segment those customers into something else, or how is your marketing strategy according to them?
देखिए मार्केटिंग स्ट्रैटेजी में दो चार चीजें बड़ी सिंपल है मेरे हिसाब से.
Ajay.
Whether you are a 11-year-old customer or 11-day old customer, you need a good network. Because you are not holding this phone for fun. You are wanting to communicate, either verbally or through data. Therefore, I can't take an 11-year-old customer or 11-day customer for granted because he needs to use it. Therefore, I've got to provide you a good network. Number two, I've got to be competitive. You know, merely because I know you are a very loyal customer of mine, I cannot be overcharging you. If the market, my competition is charging 100, maybe I can charge 110. But if I'm going to charge you 200, sooner or later it will shift for a very simple reason, not that you mind paying 200, but you will feel cheated. You will feel that the company is taking you for granted because you are a loyal customer and is not extending the benefits which it is ready to extend to other customers, the new customers. So that aspect is a part of marketing strategy. The third aspect is don't complicate life. Don't come out with very complex tariff plans. Come out with simple tariff plan which enables you to choose what is best for you. And in fact, I would say even going further, we have been doing it to keep suggesting customers as to what is the best plan for your usage, which is the most value for money plan.
Customized plan, kind of thing.
So the customer loyalty comes from a very reciprocal act of respecting customer. If you take any company will start taking customers for granted, sooner or later the customer will leave him. But yeah, one thing is very clear. Most of the people say, oh, your customer service should be great. For customer loyalty, I completely differ because I have not come across any telecom customer, including myself, who ever wants to talk to a telecom company. No customer ever wants to call the telecom company. Therefore, the best telecom companies' customer services where no call comes to them. That is the best telecom customer service. Give them great network. They don't need to talk to you.
Sir, I have another question. Okay, go ahead.
Can I
go ahead.
Yeah, adding on to Aman's point, sir. So I have also been loyal customer of Airtel as long as I know. And I believe that the two differentiation strategies that you talked about, good network and pricing. Personally, I had faced many times that there was no proper network for my Airtel SIM. And also, I believe that at some point, the pricing was always a bit 3 to 5 rupees higher than the competitors that I pursued. But still, I don't know why I stayed with Airtel. So was that something that Airtel's marketing strategy planned, or was it a byproduct of overall advertising, let's say the Airtel tune, or overall positioning in the market? Because I don't know why I have stayed with Airtel. Even sometimes I have faced glitches with the network.
I think that's a very, very relevant question because I won't even dispute that, not that our networks are what we would want them to be. And most of the time, it is because of the limitations we face, limitations on spectrum, too much traffic because of very, very low prices. That's another fallback of extremely low prices. The traffic is so much that the capacity can't cope. So we are aware that many places our customers face network problems. So there are two things. One is everything is relative. You know, in radio communication, you can never have a perfect network. It's impossible. Nowhere in the world you can have any perfect network. And the reason for that is these networks were originally designed to be only outdoors. But of course, today you expect the network to work in the third basement also. So the expectations have changed. So it's all relative. As long as I am better than the competition on my network, I am competitive in terms of tariff, and I am able to convey to you that you matter as a customer to me, that you're kind of an extended family member, I think you will stay. So customers will stay unless we are doing something terribly wrong.
So, since you've led to formation of many partnerships and transformational initiatives you've conceptualized and implemented, so you must have faced a lot of crises in your life. Any particular story that you remember that you would want to share, or any key management lesson that you would want to share with us, which would be fruitful in our future?
No, I think one thing one has to understand, every time you would want to attempt anything innovative, be prepared for a lot of resistance. So for instance, when we thought of IT outsourcing, and I gave you the reason why we thought of it, it was not a fashion statement for us. It was a statement that since I'm not ready to compromise on our big dream of becoming an all India operator, I will find other ways of finding resources to do that. And one of the ways was I'll partner with IBM and make them my comprehensive partner for providing IT services. Now, the moment you do that, you face a lot of resistance. I still remember in one of the board meetings, we had people from British Telecom and other global companies on our board, and they were all horrified at the thought that information technology we will put in somebody else's hand, which was considered as a core strength and resource of the company. They were just simply horrified, and they told us that you're too new, you do not know the consequences, and so on and so forth. There was a huge amount of resistance. Our well-wishers from all over the world called us to say, this is a big mistake you are doing. And as we explained the logic, I still remember at the end of one of the meetings, Sunil was a great supporter of my thought. So he had to finally come up and say, listen guys, we know what we are doing. We have thought of everything which you have mentioned. So we are not taking you lightly on this, but we have thought about it. The only choice we have is either we do this or we curb our ambition of growth. And we try to grow one circle at a time and slow down that growth. And since as the promoter and as the CEO of the company, we were not willing to compromise on the growth, we had to finally tell the board that, look, mine and Nakil's neck are on the line. If it doesn't work, sack us. So you would always face many of these problems every time you're trying to do something new. Some could be internal, some could be external. For instance, when we went back to the network vendors, and I said, I want pricing which is based on dollar per airline. So I really, frankly, don't care how much equipment you put into it. What I need is capacity, right? And I want coverage. These are the only two parameters. Whatever capacity you give me, I'm ready to pay you. There was huge resistance from the vendor world. Ericsson and Nokia and everybody said, no, this is never done. This is not the way telecom networks are bought. Finally, we prevailed because we were able to convince one of them, which was Motorola, that this is the right way of supplying. It's good for you, good for us. And so you would always in your life, every time you want to do something which is off the block, which is out of the box, which is not along the proven path, you are bound to face these problems. And that does take a whole lot of mental and physical energy to deal with it. And also a very solid groundwork which you should have prepared to anticipate all those issues which will be raised and how you have thought about overcoming them. But yeah, this will never change. These resistances and troubles and crises you will always face if you have to think of doing things differently in a more innovative manner. But having said that, that's a lot of fun. Once you overcome it and it works, There's a lot of fun. So I would say you guys, as you become leaders, please keep encouraging people to think out of the box and not be afraid that sometimes it would not work. You should never try and tell somebody that, oh, it didn't work. Some will work, some will not work. But don't give up innovation.
Sir, I have another question. Recently, like in around 2010, Airtel underwent a change of the logo. Was that just something, or I mean, what was the purpose behind changing the logo?
I think the basic purpose behind changing the logo was that till 2010, the telecom service, particularly the mobile service, because of the cost involved, was supposed to be a service for rich people, for business people, for people above a certain age bracket, and so on. And as the prices came down, realized that more and more customers were coming which were youth. And therefore, the whole idea of change of that logo was to convey a more youthful image of the company. Because if you remember earlier, we had Airtel written in large case, and then we changed it to small case. That was one big change of shifting from addressing to a more mature audience to a younger customer base. So I guess that was the main reason. But frankly, what most of these advertising agencies tell you as the logic for these changes, I've sometimes not understood. It's beyond me. But that was one reason which we felt was a good reason to convey an image that we are ready for the younger customers.
Right, sir. Thank you.
So one more question. So when you are sitting at the top, whether you call it a boon or a bane, is that you sometimes would have had to make some hard decisions or would have had faced dilemmas. So if you could share any such experience, or even if you don't share the experience, we as a batch would like to know your thought process that you usually employ when you're making such hard decisions, or like choosing out one out of the many opportunities for a dilemma. So what exactly is your thought process like, and so that as future leaders we can also think along the same lines? So if you could share any incident.
So I always feel the hardest decisions are related to people. That is one thing which I find the hardest to deal with. And there are 2-3 kinds of very hard decisions which from time to time we have had to take. One was a set of cases where very senior people, great performers, were indulging in code of conduct issues. And our principle is that higher you go, more kosher the code of conduct has to be. For instance, if at a very senior level, somebody is going to put his personal expense into company expense, that is unpardonable. That's a principle in the code of conduct which we say, irrespective of your stature, irrespective of your performance, we will have zero tolerance for code of conduct issues. And we have had cases, sexual harassment, taking advantage of employees working with you. We have had some cases at very senior levels, and we had to actually just ask them to go, despite the fact that they were perhaps some of the best performers for the company. The other set of problems which I have faced in my career is people who have served the company beautifully. They've been with the company for 15 years, but you do not find any career plan for them because in your assessment, they've hit a glass ceiling. Now that's a very, very difficult task, because to tell somebody that, sorry, we do not find you capable of growing from this place is a very uncomfortable thing, especially for somebody who has worked with you for 15 years. Right? Conversely, if you don't do it and you keep promoting him, the company will suffer because you feel he's not capable of doing that role. Therefore, the most difficult decision is to have a conversation with such a person. The policy we have is call that person, tell him truthfully about what you feel, give him a chance to explain why he doesn't agree. Either you reconsider and be convinced that he needs another chance, try him at one more level. Or if you're convinced, convey to him honestly that, sorry, in this company, you have hit a glass ceiling. So don't expect any promotions or so on. You can be in the company at the same role. But since you feel you can do much better, we don't want to come in your way. Take your time, take 8 months, 9 months, 1 year to try and find yourself another opportunity in which the company will support you. So you do let them make their career elsewhere if it cannot be with you. And third, of course, is poor performance. That one is still a little easier to handle as long as your measurements are very clear. And that's why we make it a point that 80% of the KPIs, the key performance indicators, are measurable. They're based on facts and figures, and only 20% are subjective. Because if you can show somebody that the performance has been consistently poor, it's easier to deal with it. But if you suddenly wake up one day and say, oh, maza nahi aa raha yaar kaam karne mein, that's what really hurts people.
Sir, I have another question.
Thank you, sir.
Sir, when at times when you don't have any
Sorry,
immediate
आपकी आवाज कट रही है.
problems to deal with, and
Can
how
you
do
repeat
you
that, please?
sorry?
Can you repeat it, please? I think your voice went off.
Yeah, sir, actually I was asking, there are times when you do not have immediate tasks at hand, when you have suppose you have just completed a project and there is some leisure time. In that time, how do you approach or try to find out problems or deal with that time in your office?
If you have just completed a project, the best way to deal with it is take a holiday, go on a vacation, rejuvenate yourself, come back, think about some new thing which you can do, think of another project which you can propose or you can do. So free time is always sometimes the best time,
Yes.
the most productive time, when you can actually apply your mind for thinking for new things. Now, that could be at a vacation, that could be at the workplace, but it's important for people, especially at the senior levels and the leadership levels, to have free time. Their mind should be free from day-to-day tension so that they can really plan ahead, think of long-term, think of innovative ideas, make this strategy simple, clear, more relevant to the current times. So I think free time is something which should be encouraged, and people should be encouraged to utilize that free time in a very productive manner of thinking ahead.
Yes, sir. But how do you choose what things to work upon? And I mean, there may be several things.
Yeah, so I would say the leaders should choose themselves. What do they think out of those several things? The priority, which is the most important, which they want to do first. And you could actually have a pipeline and say, these are the 6 things to be done, but let's choose these 2 in the very first phase. And then what happens is that you would not have gaps between projects because of 4 other projects already lined up. So it becomes easier. And make it a kind of a factory approach that every time something gets done, you line up some new things which you can work on to improve the performance of the company.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Hello, sir. You had mentioned a pertinent point regarding the supply chains. So I feel that one of the key recipes for success for Airtel was its strong networks effect in terms of its distributors and agents and franchisee owners, especially in the early 2000s as well. So what key strategies you must have used to hold on to your supply chain so that the competitor does not just swoop in and take the advantage of the hard work that you did and takes these agents and franchisee owners? So was there some key strategy that was used? Like, for example, how Patanjali came and took the advantage of Hindustan Unilever's distribution network. So how can we make this competitive strength more sustainable?
I think it's fundamentally, to my mind, whether it is supply chain on the front end side or on the back end side with your vendors, the fundamental theme for success is every time you work with them and you come up with a policy, you have got to be thinking of win-win situation. Many a company will find that the sole aim of supply chain while dealing with the vendors is to say how much can I squeeze the discount from them. Now, to our mind, we always felt that that's a very lousy policy because unless the vendor is able to make a decent return on his capital and on his business with you, he is never going to go all out and work for you and give you solutions which are best for you. Same goes for the distribution. When you make distributor, you've got to fundamentally believe that he will stay with you. Not because he loves Airtel or he loves the person going to a shop. There has to be a vested interest. He's there in the market to earn, to feed his family. You've got to give him an opportunity to earn commensurate with the effort which he puts in. And therefore, all your policies on distribution, how much territory to give, how much business he can have before you put another distributor, those need to be such that they actually realize that it's a win-win situation and not a win-lose situation. If you do that, I think in most functions and with most external world, you will find people will trust you, they will stay with you. Most important, they will stand up with you in difficult times. They're not going to desert you because you have some difficulty at some point of time. You might have read in the newspapers that in this pandemic, Airtel went out to many of these retailers and said, we will fund the salaries of your employees for next 3 months. And that was a very small gesture to tell them, guys, we are going to stand behind you. You do things like that, they're bound to be with you.
Sir,
Thank you.
sir, one question. Actually, I have two questions. I'll start with the first one. So with India, China and US-China tensions building up and the Chinese companies like Huawei and ZTE like facing a major hurdle with regards to this, and also being a major supplier of 5G equipment, when can we see 5G coming to India?
So look, it's not that only Chinese will be the 5G equipment suppliers. So 5G will come when I think the timing is right for the 5G use cases. And that could be a year or 2 years away. We would look forward to some sensible pricing on the spectrum pricing in the auctions. And so it's not about China. I think it's about the whole ecosystem for 5G, which might delay it slightly. That's about a year, year and a half.
So the second question is for the, like you mentioned, people who hit the glass ceiling in the organization. So can the company just give them an option to go for a sabbatical to join academics and gain new perspective? Is it a viable option?
I think once you can have an honest conversation that you have hit a glass ceiling, and there can be two ways. You can ask them to look out, or you can ask them that we are giving you another chance, go for a course, go for something, take a month off, think about it, and come back, and maybe at that point you could find these people again useful for some new role. So you're right. I think that's another way of trying to, because it is very difficult to lose a person who has been with you for 15, 20 years, because there are inherent advantages of having that kind of a person around. It's not easy. So you wouldn't want to lose him. But conversely, I also feel that good managements must actually take a pledge that we are not getting people into our organization to stunt them and stunt their growth. Every time I look at somebody who joins our organization, I feel I have kind of become now responsible as a senior leader for his career progression. Now, whether that career progression is with my company or it's outside, still, it gives me so much pleasure when I see so many people from Bharti Group who are at top positions in various companies across India and globally. It's wonderful. They are the biggest brand ambassadors we can have. But you have to have that feeling that you are not going to ruin the career of these people. And that is why that honest conversation or any steps which you can take to up his glass ceiling are definitely most welcome. And if it doesn't work in your company, facilitate him, help him to go somewhere else and fulfill his career dreams.
Thank you, sir. That is really a very good thing that you are doing for your employees.
Hello, sir. This is Showman here. So I have a couple of questions for you. So firstly, I would like to tell that this has been by far the most interactive session, and there are so many questions I couldn't find a pause in between so that I can get in and ask my question. So there are two questions taking cue from what you have been telling. One is regarding the organizational culture, that you were saying that 80% of the positioning has to be done internally, so that the succession planning part to maintain to the integrity and the culture part. But and you are talking about the DNA of the organization. So what I was saying that the mutation of the DNA, that is also equally important, right? To get a steady stream of new ideas into the organization, so that the culture can develop. So isn't it so that the percentage, that the breakup that you're saying 80% or 20%, shouldn't it not be more balanced, so that we have a steady stream of new ideas coming into the organization, enriching the culture? That's the first question.
You mean there should be more outsiders?
Yes.
No, I don't believe this, that because people have worked in your environment for a long time, they cannot be innovative. In fact, they can be the most innovative because they have seen through the problems being faced with the current processes or the current ways of working. They can actually, people from bottoms up can come out with the most suitable, simple solutions to fix problems. So they can be the most innovative. So it's not right that unless you get people from outside, no new ideas or no new innovation can come in. As I said, it's a matter of culture. If you encourage people to think, they will think.
Okay, sir. Coming to the second part, you were talking about the leadership aspect. So a crucial part of the leadership is taking hard decisions, which may end up making you unpopular for a certain period. I mean, unless and until you deliver the result, the harsh decisions that you are taking may make you unpopular. So what will be your suggestion in that aspect? How to tackle that?
Become unpopular if needed. That is the simple solution. A leader has to be prepared to be unpopular. Otherwise, you're no leader. Because if you are only wanting to win popularity contests all the time, fortunately, in companies, you don't have elections every 4 years or 5 years. So there's no voting. So you can afford to be unpopular for a while. The politicians have a more difficult task, but the corporate leadership can definitely afford to be a bit unpopular as and when needed. But it's again a matter of, if you have a culture where you're sharing things with people and you have been honest to them as to what are the difficulties which you're facing and why you are taking what can be perceived as an unpopular decision, you'll be surprised how much support you can actually get from the people, even those who are directly affected by the decision. People come up and say, yes, you have been telling us this is the problem, we could get into this problem, we can see this problem has hit us, and therefore we are prepared. It's okay. So you can overcome unpopularity if you have been communicating well and have been very honest with your people.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Sir, good morning. This is Surbhi Gupta. Building upon Soman's question and your answer on being unpopular as a leader, I would like to first highlight a situation to set the context of my question. Consider when we have been chosen as a leader, or we are in a position where not everyone can take a decision, but we have to believe in each other that we are either enablers or researchers or supporters to the leader. And in that point of time, not everyone can be a leader, and everyone have to know and believe that. So, but this is not the normal norm. Nowadays, everybody wants to be a leader, everybody is motivated to be a leader. And it creates a sort of dissonance in between people. So, would you like to comment on this?
Yes, so Surbhi, very clearly, it's not that company has one leader. It cannot be that the person sitting at the top is the only leader a company has. Leadership has to be by way of empowerment spread across the company. That is where you make many leaders. Yes, with different sets of authority. And therefore, in a good company, to the top guy, actually making will become scarce. Most of the decisions you have empowered people below to take. And they have all become leaders who are ready to take decisions and take risks. But you have to have a risk management system, and therefore the delegation of authority and segregation of duty, whereby certain decisions which could, let's say, change the face of the company or could bring its existence into jeopardy, those need to be taken up by the topmost leader. So it's a matter of how much delegation you can do, how much empowerment you can do. The principle should be that the most difficult and decisions which could affect the existence of the company, those obviously need to be taken at the topmost level. But routine decisions, day-to-day operational decisions, if you can keep them away and empower people below to the leaders who are at different levels of the organization, that's the best way of dealing with that. And then the company has got to have a certain level of tolerance for failures, because not every decision will work.
Yes, sir. To add one part to it, I really agree that there is a layer of leaders in a team. But when we come to a team, it might be a little bit vague, this question. When we come to a team, let's say when I was working before, we had certain people who were executors, and at points of time, what I have seen are people cannot stand following the executor, which I feel at times leads to the failure, because at times different people can be executors. It's not necessarily the same people are, but as a team we have to believe in each other, that whenever someone is taking that role, we all have to come and help them grow,
Right.
because that is how we all will grow.
That's true. And I think that's where a good leader plays a role. Because a leader is not about saying, I want it done this way. Leadership is that what is right for the company, there is a consensus being created. So you do discuss with all these people who are going to execute it. And if you are able to convey and make them look like their decisions, because there is unanimity, and you give actual weightage to their thoughts and their suggestions, then people will execute, because they have the enthusiasm that they own this. They are agreeing with this proposition. They are doing their job, what they want to do. So things become definitely easier. But that's where a good leader's job is, to try and create that consensus. People must feel, and like I mentioned, I am Airtel is the concept, and I am the owner of this particular project or this execution. Then people go out of the way to execute.
Thank you, sir.
I think it's time to wrap up, sir.
Yeah, Divya, I'm so sorry. I would have really loved to carry on. This has been a beautiful interaction for me. And I really feel good that I wrote this book. So many of you have read portions of it. So this has been wonderful. I hope that as this pandemic goes off, I get a chance to come and visit your institute personally and interact with the people there.
Yes, sir, definitely. When we'll be on the campus, we'll surely call you. We are looking forward to that.
Thank you.
So with the address of today, we are very enlightened and enriched for our future goals. And you talked about wonderful things like corporate world being a complex and a dynamic world, and the importance of simplicity and simplification as a virtue. So tomorrow we'll be, as leaders, we're going to simplify things for our team leaders and for the subordinates to work, and we will not complex things up. So we've got good lessons for that. And for collective decision making, one of the most beautiful statements that you made is that when you have success, the team, give the credit to the team. And when it's a failure, give this entire blame to yourself. And you also talked about dilemma and dichotomies when there's between companies and people. So if you said just that we should plan well and we should have the right intentions to go through these dichotomies. And you also told about succession planning and career planning, wherein 80% of vacancies are filled internally by HUL. That's the best practice that you gave. And you also talked about out-of-box thinking and the resistance to change by the employees. So, and you said that if you prepare well, if you have the right intentions, if you corner them from all areas, and the statement that Sir made that if it doesn't work, sack us. So that's the kind of confidence requires. It requires to push things through. So, sir, thank you very much for all these key management lessons that we had today. It was a wonderful opportunity, and thank you, Batch, for participating and making this interaction fruitful.
Thank you very much, and my best wishes to each one of you. I look forward to seeing you in very senior positions over the next years as you move into the corporate world. And my very best to you. Best wishes. Keep safe.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Hello, hello, hello.
हेलो नहीं बोलना, अभी रिकॉर्डिंग ऑन है हालांकि, पर यू कैन स्टार्ट विथ योर yawning.
Good time for it,
It's already
Satarshi.
on record.
और रिकॉर्ड IT भाई भूल गया. हम लोग तो बात कर ही सकते हैं.
हाँ, कर तो सकते हैं, इसमें क्या है. आईटी साइड में कौन है? बालाजी है, कौन है?
IT भाई, आपका नाम बताइए. देखो तरुण आ गया.
Hi, good morning.
गुड मॉर्निंग. कल रात को आइडिया भेजा, बहुत खूब.
कल रात हम लोगों को डाउट था, हम लोग क्वेश्चन पूछ रहे थे, सुबह आंसर मिला, पूरी रात पढ़ नहीं पाया मैं.
हाँ,
पूरी रात पढ़ नहीं पाया, आइडिया खोल के देखता रहा, ऐसा होगा ऐसा होगा.
बट एक्चुअली शिल्पी ने एक ईमेल किया था, उसमें कुछ कुछ पोर्शन में ना ऐसा पैरेलल मार्क किया हुआ है. शिल्पी का बहुत पुराना एक ईमेल है, वहाँ पे आइडिया का अटैचमेंट, वो एक्चुअली स्कैन कॉपी है.
हाँ.
इट इज नॉट सर्चेबल और समथिंग, बट उसमें ना कुछ कुछ मार्क किया हुआ है.
देखता हूँ. थैंक्स बताने के लिए, मैं देखता हूँ शायद खाना खा.
एग्जाम के बारे में ही सोचता है तरुण.
नहीं अभी आपको देखा, अभी तो याद आया, कल रात को बात कर रहे थे.
सिर्फ सीडीसी का ध्यान रखता है.
सही बोलो.
हाँ, पता है मुझे.
चलो खाना खाते हैं, क्लास है शायद 1 बजे से 2 बजे से.
ये कब से हो गया?
4 बजे भाई.
नहीं
अरे तरुण दंगे करवाओगे क्या?
4 बजे है.
अलग ही सीन करा रहे हो यार.
चलो भाई, लंच करते हैं.
चलो गाइस,
बाय बाय.
चलो, बाय बाय.